What if there was a place between lives? A quiet cafe where the choices you didn't make, the words you never spoke, and the loves you let slip away were waiting for you. Walter thought it was just another ordinary day, until he walked through the door and found himself face to face with his past, his regrets, and a chance to rewrite the story of his life. Welcome to the Cafe Between Lives, Part 1, the jukebox on the edge of nowhere. Walter Allison woke to a sound he hadn't heard in decades, the soft, scratchy hum of a vinyl record spinning somewhere in the distance. At first, he thought he was still dreaming, lying in the worn hospital bed he had somehow fallen asleep in last night. But the air was different here, warmer, scented with coffee and something faintly like old paper. He opened his eyes fully and found himself sitting in a small cafe that seemed impossibly familiar, yet entirely unknown. The walls were paneled in dark oak, tables polished with decades of fingerprints, and at the far end, a jukebox blinked softly in red and blue lights, playing a song that tugged at the corners of memory. He tried to stand, but the legs under him felt heavier, as if they were tethered to the floor by invisible threads. Behind the counter, a woman in her late 40s, hair the color of autumn chestnuts, eyes calm and knowing, wiped a cup with a linen cloth. "Welcome," she said, voice gentle, a little musical. "I'm Evelyn. You're here for..." A pause. "A pause?" Walter croaked, his voice dry. "Where am I?" "You could say this is a cafe between lives," Evelyn replied, setting down the cup she'd been polishing. "Most people call it a waiting room. Others never call it at all. But everyone drinks coffee here, in one way or another." Walter blinked. A cafe between lives. The words made no sense, yet his chest tightened with a curious mixture of fear and recognition, as if he had always known this place was possible. The tables held customers, though the shapes were unfamiliar. An old man hunched over a steaming cup of black coffee, a small boy with restless eyes, a woman reading letters that seemed older than the cafe itself. They all looked up briefly at him, smiled, and returned to their silent rituals. "Sit," Evelyn said, gesturing to a booth near the window. "You'll find that some things aren't explained, but they are felt." Walter eased into the seat, noticing the jukebox more closely now. Its chrome edges gleamed, and the music. It was a song from his very first date with May, his late wife. The melody floated between the tables, a tender reminder of a life long past, of decisions made and words left unspoken. "Coffee?" Evelyn asked, her hand hovering above a menu that seemed less like a list of drinks and more like a ledger of choices. "Cup of remembrance, second chance slice, calling home." Walter swallowed hard. I guess." She smiled, almost knowingly. "Then you'll want the cup of remembrance. It's a strong blend. Tastes of what you once feared to lose, and sometimes what you never realized you had." The cup arrived steaming, fragrant. As he lifted it to his lips, the cafe seemed to pulse, time bending gently around him. And then he was there, seated at a picnic table in Toledo, 17 years old again, arguing with a boy who would become his closest friend, a girl who would become the love of his life. A moment suspended, fragile, full of regret and longing. Walter blinked, and the cafe returned. But he wasn't the same man who had walked in. He understood somehow that the drinks here were not just beverages, they were gateways. And every sip would demand something from him. Memory, honesty, perhaps even courage. He glanced at Evelyn. I don't know if I'm ready for this." "You never are," she said softly, pouring another cup for a customer across the room. "But that's the point." Outside, the world seemed to stretch endlessly, a highway glowing under an invisible sun. Inside, the cafe waited. And for the first time in many years, Walter felt that life, past, present, or whatever came next, was a choice, one he would have to make carefully, one cup at a time. Part 2. The menu of things left unsaid. Walter stared at the menu before him, a thin, leather-bound book that seemed worn with age, yet impossibly new. The titles weren't food or drink, at least not in any conventional sense. Cup of Remembrance, Second Chance Slice, Calling Home. He traced the words with his finger, feeling a strange warmth in the touch, as if each phrase held the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Evelyn leaned against the counter. "The menu chooses you as much as you choose it," she said. "Some people come for one thing and find themselves somewhere entirely different." Walter's hands trembled slightly. He wasn't used to being this vulnerable, this aware of himself. But something about the cafe, the quiet hum of the jukebox, the way the sunlight caught dust motes in the air, made him trust it. I'll try the cup of remembrance," he said, his voice low. The cup arrived almost instantly, steaming and fragrant, carrying the aroma of cinnamon and something indefinably sweet. He brought it to his lips, inhaled, and was immediately transported. He was 17 again, sitting on the edge of a rusty picnic table in the park near his childhood home. The late afternoon sun slanted across the cracked pavement, highlighting the freckles on his best friend Tommy's face. He and Tommy were arguing, voices sharp, over something trivial now, yet at the time it felt monumental. The moment expanded, every heartbeat echoing with the weight of youth, of choices that would ripple across decades. A girl laughed nearby, May, though he didn't yet know her name. Her laugh had the lightness of wind through trees, yet it pierced him, a quiet ache of longing he would carry for decades. Walter realized, almost painfully, that this was one of the many crossroads he had failed to navigate. He had chosen ambition over connection, comfort over confrontation, work over love. And in doing so, he had left pieces of himself behind, pieces that now drifted before him in the cafe, waiting for acknowledgement. He blinked and returned to the cafe. The steam from the cups swirled in the air, forming shapes that seemed to hint at memories he had forgotten entirely. Around him, other patrons moved quietly, some sipping drinks, others staring into nothingness as if conversing with ghosts of their own lives. Evelyn approached. "The cafe isn't about fixing your past," she said gently. "It's about seeing it, and perhaps understanding what you can take with you." Walter nodded, though he wasn't sure he fully understood. The jukebox shifted to a different song, slow and lilting, and he realized that each note mirrored the heartbeat of his own regrets. He wondered how many cups of remembrance others had drunk here, and what fragments of themselves remained in this small, timeless room. A young boy at a nearby booth caught his eye, glancing up and smiling faintly. He reminded Walter of himself. The same restless energy, the same hesitant hope. For the first time in years, he felt a connection that transcended time, as though the cafe itself had reached across decades to remind him of what mattered. He sipped again. Each taste carried another memory, a failed promise, an unspoken apology, a fleeting joy he had overlooked. And in that tasting, he felt a subtle shift, a quiet stir of courage. Perhaps this place wasn't just a pause. Perhaps it was a guide, showing him not only who he had been, but who he still could be. Walter set the cup down, heart thudding, realizing that the first choice had already been made simply by arriving here. The cafe, the jukebox, the menu. They had claimed him, not by force, but by the gentle insistence of memory and possibility. Evelyn watched him silently, knowing the journey was only beginning. Outside, the highway stretched endlessly, a ribbon of light leading nowhere and everywhere at once. And inside, the cafe waited, patient and eternal, as Walter took his first tentative step into understanding what lay between what was and what could still be. Part 3, Booth 7. A boy with Walter's eyes. Walter's eyes wandered across the cafe, taking in the other patrons with a mixture of curiosity and unease. The old man sipping his coffee seemed to carry decades of silent regrets. The woman reading the yellowed letters trembled slightly as she turned each page, and a small boy, no older than 12, sat alone in booth 7, staring at the jukebox with wide, attentive eyes. Something about the boy stopped Walter mid-thought. The eyes, they were his own. Same hazel flecked with gold, same cautious wariness that he remembered from his youth. A chill ran down his spine. He hadn't expected to see a reflection of himself so vividly in another soul, especially not one that appeared decades younger than his own body. Compelled, Walter approached the booth. "Hello there," he said softly. The boy looked up, startled, but not frightened. "Do I know you?" The boy tilted his head, studying him. "Maybe," he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Or maybe you just know me." Walter sat opposite him, heart racing. Something about the atmosphere, the way the cafe's lights seemed to curve around them, isolating the booth from the rest of the room, made it impossible to think linearly. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm you," the boy said simply, as though stating the obvious. "Or maybe what you could have been. I'm the one who didn't give up, the one who kept trying." Walter's mind reeled. He remembered choices he had made, decisions that had shaped the course of decades, decisions he now recognized as forks in a road that led to loss as often as to gain. The boy in the booth wasn't a ghost or a figment. He was a version of Walter unencumbered by fear, a possibility the man had left behind long ago. "You look familiar," Walter said finally, his voice unsteady. "But I don't understand. How can you be me?" The boy shrugged, leaning back with a serenity that Walter envied. "I'm the version of you that might have been, and you're the one who made the other choices. The cafe, it shows us the paths we didn't take." Walter sank into the seat, letting the words wash over him. Around them, the cafe hummed with quiet life, the jukebox shifting to a soft, melancholy tune. He felt the weight of decades pressing down, and yet, in the presence of this boy, a strange lightness emerged. For the first time, he didn't feel entirely alone. "I don't know if I'm ready to meet him," Walter admitted, gesturing toward the boy with a faint laugh. "To meet myself like this." "You don't have to," the boy said gently. "Just listen, watch, maybe learn, and maybe you can forgive." Walter's hands trembled as he reached for the cup of remembrance, still warm on the table. Each sip seemed to unlock another fragment of memory. The failed friendships, the words he had never spoken to May, the moments of courage he had buried under doubt. He saw them all reflected in the boy, what he had lost and what could still be found. "You're me," Walter whispered again. "And yet not." "Exactly," the boy said with a small grin. "I'm what you might still be. And maybe, just maybe, we can find a way together." Walter felt a mixture of fear and hope he hadn't known in years. The cafe, he realized, was more than a waiting room. It was a mirror, a teacher, a place where the past could be examined, where regret could be held gently, and even, if one dared, redeemed. The boy reached across the table and tapped the jukebox. A new song began to play, one Walter didn't recognize, but somehow understood, its melody threading between the memories like a soft, guiding hand. And for the first time, Walter allowed himself to believe that perhaps the choices of a lifetime weren't as fixed as he had always thought. Around them, the cafe waited, patient and eternal, as Walter and his younger self sat together in silence, listening to the music of what could have been and what might still be. Part 4. The Woman in the Red Raincoat. The cafe door chimed softly, and Walter's attention snapped toward it. A woman stepped inside, shaking off droplets of rain that hadn't been falling outside the endless highway. Her coat was a vivid red, striking against the muted browns and golds of the cafe's interior. There was something about her presence, an unmistakable familiarity that made Walter's chest tighten, a quiet ache that had been sleeping inside him for decades. He didn't need a moment to place her. May, his May. The woman he had loved, lost, and mourned quietly over a lifetime. And yet, here she was, alive again, though not entirely as he remembered. The cafe seemed to bend around her, light softening, shadows retreating as if the world itself acknowledged her arrival. May's eyes found his immediately, and for a heartbeat, the decades of silence fell away. She smiled, a fragile curve, touched by time yet still radiant. "Walter," she whispered, her voice threading through the air like a song he had forgotten but always remembered. He rose slowly, words caught somewhere between longing and disbelief. "May, is it really you?" She nodded, sitting down across from him at the small table. The jukebox played a quiet tune, one that seemed to sync with the rhythm of their hearts. Around them, the cafe's usual patrons faded into the background, as if the space itself had shifted to honor this reunion. "You've been avoiding this," she said softly. "Avoiding us, avoiding the words that should have been spoken." Walter swallowed, feeling the weight of a lifetime of choices pressing down. He had chosen work, ambition, and safety over love and vulnerability. He had stayed silent when he should have spoken, left her alone when he should have held her. And now, seeing her here, he felt both the sting of regret and the warmth of recognition. He began, but the words faltered. "I didn't know how to fix things." "Sometimes," she said gently, "fixing isn't the point. Understanding is. Acknowledging. That's what this place gives us." Walter's gaze fell to the small cup in front of him, still warm from the cafe's magic. Each sip seemed to pull another memory from the corners of his mind. Evenings spent in quiet companionship, arguments over trivial matters, tender touches that had gone unremarked, moments he had never truly appreciated. All of it converged here, in this moment, between them. May reached across the table, her hand brushing his. The contact was light, fleeting, yet it carried the weight of decades. "We were always trying," she said, "even when we failed." Walter felt a lump in his throat, a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words tasting foreign, yet necessary. "For everything I left unsaid, everything I failed to do." Her smile softened, tinged with sadness and understanding. "I know, and that's why we're here, to say the words, to feel the moments, to recognize what was real." Outside the cafe, the rain had stopped, leaving the world glistening and silent. Inside, the jukebox shifted to a new song, one they had never heard together, but which resonated with the unspoken truths between them. Walter realized, with a profound clarity, that this meeting wasn't about changing the past. It was about witnessing it fully, embracing both the joy and the regret, and allowing it to become part of him again. For the first time in many years, he felt a sense of peace settle over him, fragile yet undeniable. The cafe, patient and eternal, had given him a gift, the chance to speak, to connect, to feel the weight and the beauty of a life shared, even if only for a fleeting, magical moment between lives. And as they sat together, the music playing softly, Walter understood that the true magic of the cafe was not in what it showed, but in what it allowed the heart to remember. Part 5, the letter that never left Toledo. Walter was still seated across from May, their hands brushing lightly over the table, when Evelyn appeared with a small worn parcel. It had no markings except for a faded stamp that read, "Parcel of regret." Walter's brow furrowed. "What? What is this?" Evelyn said it before him gently. "Letters, things you never sent, words you were too afraid to write, moments you didn't acknowledge. Sometimes people leave more behind than they realize." He hesitated, then peeled back the brown paper, revealing envelopes yellowed with age, each one meticulously addressed in his own handwriting. One bore the familiar return address from Toledo, the town of his youth. Another carried the name of his son, Michael, written with shaky hands from a decade past. And there was one, tied with a thin ribbon, labeled simply, "To May." Walter's hands shook as he unfolded the first letter. Words scrawled in youthful haste confronted him. Apologies unspoken, confessions of fear and love, promises he had never kept. Reading them now, decades later, he felt the weight of every choice, every hesitation, every moment he had allowed fear to rule. He reached for the next letter, the one to Michael. He had written it after a particularly bitter argument, after years of prioritizing work over family. In the letter, he admitted regrets he had never voiced, tried to offer advice, and begged forgiveness he had not yet earned. Walter's throat tightened. The words were raw, alive, and painfully honest. "And this?" he asked, holding up the final envelope to Evelyn. She nodded. "The one you never sent to May. Perhaps the one you feared most." Walter opened it carefully. Inside were confessions of love and longing, acknowledgments of mistakes, and words he had never had the courage to speak aloud. "I remember the nights we laughed until we cried, the mornings I wished I could hold you longer. I'm sorry for leaving, for choosing comfort over us. I wish I had known then what I know now." Tears blurred his vision. For a moment, he felt transported, not by the café, but by the life he had lived and the opportunities he had lost. Every unsent letter was a bridge to moments that had slipped through his fingers. And yet, in the quiet magic of this place, each word carried the possibility of something more. "You see," Evelyn said softly, "here, your letters don't need delivery to be heard. The act of recognition, the courage to face them, is enough. Sometimes the universe listens, even if no one else does." Walter traced the folds of the letters, feeling the texture of his own handwriting beneath his fingertips. A strange comfort settled over him. He couldn't change the past, couldn't unsay the words or reclaim the moments he had lost. But he could acknowledge them, hold them in memory, and perhaps, in some mysterious way, offer them to the world he had left behind. He looked at May, who watched him with a tender, knowing expression. "It's not too late," she said quietly. "Even here, we can honor what was real, and maybe, just maybe, make peace." Walter nodded, swallowing hard. The café seemed to pulse around him, the soft light of the jukebox casting shadows that danced along the walls. Outside, the highway stretched on endlessly, a ribbon of possibilities. And inside, he felt that the act of remembering, the act of confronting his unspoken words, was a step toward reconciliation, not just with others, but with himself. He gathered the letters, holding them close. Each was a fragment of his life, a testament to choices made and unmade. And in that quiet, timeless cafe, Walter began to understand that sometimes the power of a life wasn't measured in the paths taken, but in the courage to face the ones left behind. Part 6, a call you can still make. The cafe's quiet hum shifted subtly as Evelyn approached Walter with a small antique telephone. Its brass edges gleamed under the soft light, and the cord curled like a snake across the countertop. "Some visitors discover that not all doors in this place are closed," she said. "Some lines still connect to the living world. Just one call. No guarantees, no control over the outcome. But you can try." Walter's hands trembled as he lifted the receiver. He hadn't spoken to his son, Michael, in years, not truly. Distance, pride, and a lifetime of unspoken words had built walls he feared were insurmountable. And now, here, he had the chance to bridge the gap in a way he hadn't thought possible. He dialed the familiar number, feeling the tension coil tighter with each rotation of the old rotary dial. The phone clicked and whirred as the connection formed. A few moments of silence stretched like eternity. Then, an answering machine's voice, cold and automated, spoke Michael's name. Walter's throat tightened. The words he had practiced for decades threatened to catch in his chest. Michael, he began, his voice cracking. It's Dad, I know. I know it's been a long time. I made mistakes. The line beeped, cutting him off before he could finish. Walter set the receiver down with a heavy sigh. His chest ached, a mix of failure, fear, and longing. Even here, even in this mystical cafe, connection to the world he had left behind remained fragile, elusive, and unpredictable. Evelyn approached, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. You tried, she said softly. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes trying is the first step toward repair, even if it isn't immediate. The courage to reach, even when you don't know if you'll be heard, is what matters. Walter nodded, though the lump in his throat remained. Around him, the cafe's patrons continued their quiet rituals, sipping coffee and recalling fragments of their own lives. The boy in booth 7 watched silently, eyes reflecting a mixture of understanding and sympathy, as if he knew the weight of words left unsaid. He picked up the receiver again, considering redialing, but hesitated. What if Michael resented him? What if the opportunity had passed irrevocably? Fear gripped him, the same fear that had haunted him for decades. Yet in that fear, there was also a glimmer of something he had not felt in years. Hope. Walter placed the receiver back in its cradle and turned to Evelyn. I don't know if I can do it, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I'm ready to face him. Evelyn smiled, patient and knowing. You don't need to be ready, just willing. Sometimes willingness is all the universe requires. He let the words settle, feeling their weight, their truth. Outside, the highway stretched endlessly, a pale ribbon of possibility. Yet inside, the cafe felt more intimate than ever. A space where courage and regret could meet, where choices could be reconsidered, and where the impossible was made tangible through memory and presence. Walter lifted the cup of remembrance once more, inhaling its steam. Each sip reminded him that life, even in its unfinished and imperfect form, was full of moments yet to be reconciled. And though the call had not gone as he had hoped, he understood. Sometimes the act of trying, even without certainty, was itself a form of healing. He set the cup down gently and glanced across the room. The woman in the red raincoat sat quietly, watching him with an expression that seemed to understand every nuance of his pain. The boy in booth 7 nodded slightly, as if silently offering encouragement. And somewhere in the soft hum of the cafe, Walter realized that while some connections were lost to time, others, those forged in courage, honesty, and presence, could endure, even between lives. For the first time in decades, he felt a flicker of something he had thought impossible. Peace, fragile but real, emerging in the stillness of the cafe's magic. Part 7, The Night of the Unremembered. The cafe seemed quieter that evening, though it wasn't empty. Walter sat alone at his booth, the cup of remembrance cooling before him. The jukebox played a slow, haunting melody he didn't recognize, and the air was thick with a sense of anticipation. Evelyn moved among the tables with her usual calm grace, her eyes occasionally flicking toward the door as if expecting someone or something. "It happens once in a while," she said softly when Walter finally asked. "The night of the unremembered." He frowned. "The what?" Evelyn smiled faintly, a little sadly. "Tonight, souls who are forgotten by the living come here. They don't exist anywhere else. No one remembers their names, their faces, or the lives they led. They drift through the world, unseen, unheard, until they reach this place." Walter felt a shiver run down his spine. The thought of a life erased, of becoming someone no one remembered, was terrifying. He glanced at the cafe's entrance, half expecting the night to remain ordinary, and then he saw them. Shadows, pale and shifting, drifting through the door as if carried by the wind. The silhouettes were humanoid but indistinct, their faces blurred, their voices soft murmurs that couldn't quite be understood. One of the figures approached a table near the window and sat without acknowledgement, drinking from a cup that seemed to materialize from the air. Another lingered by the jukebox, fingers brushing invisible keys. The cafe, it seemed, held them gently, offering a refuge even to those the world had abandoned. Walter's heart pounded. He imagined what it would be like to be forgotten entirely, to vanish without a trace. The boy in booth 7 watched silently, eyes reflecting the same fear. "They're not gone," the boy said softly. "Not really. They just wait. And tonight, we see them." The unremembered souls moved among the tables, and Walter felt a strange empathy stirring in his chest. Their existence was fragile, ephemeral, yet there was dignity in the way they occupied the cafe. He realized that the fear of being forgotten was universal, a weight that each visitor carried in some form. Evelyn approached him then, her voice low. "You fear being forgotten, Walter, but even forgotten lives leave ripples. Your presence here, your courage, your choices, they matter, even if unseen." Walter nodded, swallowing hard. The jukebox shifted to a different song, one that resonated with a deep, melancholic harmony. He felt the weight of decades of memory pressing against him, the moments he had missed, the words he had left unsaid. And yet, in the soft glow of the cafe and the quiet presence of the unremembered, he understood something fundamental. Acknowledgement, even if only in this space, could grant existence a form of permanence. As the night deepened, the unremembered souls began to fade slowly, dissolving into the air like mist. Walter watched them go, a mixture of relief and sorrow filling him. He realized that while life could erase names and faces, it could not erase the act of remembering itself. For the first time, he felt a quiet courage settle over him. He had faced the possibility of being forgotten, and it had not consumed him. The cafe, eternal and patient, had shown him that even in the shadow of oblivion, presence mattered. And as he sipped the last of his cup, he felt a subtle but undeniable shift, a sense of belonging in a place that existed between life and memory, where every choice, every word, and every feeling could still leave its mark. The jukebox played on, the soft music threading through the cafe, carrying the memory of lives both remembered and unremembered, while Walter prepared himself for the truths yet to be revealed in the days or moments that remained. Part 8. Evelyn's Check. Walter sat in a quiet corner of the cafe, watching the remnants of the unremembered souls fade into the dim light. The jukebox hummed a low, steady tune, as if marking the passage of some invisible time. Evelyn approached, carrying a small leather-bound ledger. She set it on the table before him with a soft thud. "This is for you," she said. "Or, more accurately, for us both." Walter's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." Evelyn opened the ledger, revealing pages filled with names, dates, and tiny notations. Each entry was precise, almost surgical in its detail. I keep track of the visitors, she explained. Not just their names, but the moments they need to confront, the choices they must face. Some leave here unchanged, others, well, some never leave at all. Walter leaned in, intrigued and uneasy. Never leave? Evelyn's eyes darkened briefly. I once made a choice. Long ago, I stayed. I remained here to guide those who come after me, to offer them a chance at understanding themselves before they move on or fail to. The ledger is my check, my account of what has been and what must be. Walter swallowed hard. The weight of her words pressed on him. She wasn't just a barista or a guide. She was part of the cafe itself, a custodian of its mysteries, a soul who had chosen to linger between lives. Why did you stay? He asked quietly. Because someone had once done the same for me, she said, her gaze distant. A life I had forgotten, a kindness I had not noticed until it was too late. I remain here so others might have what I did not, the chance to see clearly, to feel deeply, to make choices with their hearts open. Walter's hands shook slightly as he traced the pages of the ledger. Each name represented a story, a life touched by the cafe's strange, gentle magic. And he realized, with a growing understanding, that Evelyn's presence was more than guidance. It was a bridge, a living proof that decisions, kindness, and courage could extend beyond the constraints of a single lifetime. She tapped the ledger gently. There's a check you must face, Walter, one that balances courage against fear, honesty against regret. And you'll find that the payment is never money, never a simple act. It is the truth of yourself laid bare. Walter nodded slowly. He felt the weight of decades pressing against his chest, the regrets, the unspoken words, the choices left to wither in silence. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something new, the understanding that truth, courage, and acknowledgement could be the currency that mattered most. Evelyn poured a fresh cup of coffee, its steam curling like a ribbon in the soft light. When the check comes due, she said, you'll know, and you must decide. Will you pay with fear or with honesty, with avoidance or with courage? It's a question only you can answer. Walter held the cup in his hands, feeling its warmth seep into his skin, into his bones. The cafe seemed to pulse around him, alive with the weight of choices and the echoes of countless lives. He understood, with a clarity that was both comforting and terrifying, that the night and the lessons of the unremembered souls had prepared him for this moment. Outside, the highway stretched endlessly, a ribbon of light that led nowhere and everywhere at once. Inside, the cafe waited patiently, timeless and eternal, offering him the chance to confront himself fully. And as Walter sipped the coffee, he felt the stirrings of courage, the faint but undeniable pull of truth, and the understanding that the check he had to face would demand everything he had left to give. Part 9. The Door That Shows Two Mornings. Walter lingered in the quiet glow of the cafe, the warmth of the last cup still seeping through his fingers. The ledger had been set aside, but its weight pressed on his mind like an unspoken question. Evelyn approached, her eyes calm, almost tender, yet carrying the gravity of inevitability. There is a door, she said softly, gesturing toward the far wall, that appears only to those ready to make a choice. It shows two mornings, one you might live if you return to the world, and one if you remain here for a final goodbye. Walter felt a chill run through him. The idea of choice had always been simple, even in life, decisions made and left behind. But this was different. It was not about right or wrong, but about courage, acceptance, and truth. He approached the door hesitantly. Its surface shimmered slightly, like heat over pavement, and as he drew nearer, two separate dawns unfolded before him. On the left, a morning familiar yet untouched, sunlight spilling over the streets of Toledo, birds singing as if no time had passed. He saw Michael, his son, moving through the quiet house, unaware of the call that had never been answered. He saw himself, older but alive, walking toward the day with possibilities still open, a chance to speak, to repair, to connect. On the right, a dawn bathed in a softer, ethereal glow. The world he had left behind, moments frozen in tenderness and regret. May sat at the kitchen table, an unopened letter before her, and for a fleeting heartbeat, he could speak to her one last time. He could choose this morning to say the words that had been held for decades, to embrace the silence, to leave behind a final imprint of love and acknowledgement. Walter's heart pounded. The choice was his, and yet it felt heavier than any he had ever made. The cafe seemed to hold its breath, the jukebox silent for the first time in his experience, the air thick with the weight of possibility. He closed his eyes, recalling the cup of remembrance, the boy in booth 7, the unremembered souls, and the letters he had never sent. Every thread of his life, the courage, the fear, the love, the regret, wove together into a tapestry he had to confront fully before moving on. Evelyn's voice came softly, almost a whisper. "You cannot choose without seeing the full weight of your life. Remember, Walter, courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it." He opened his eyes and gazed once more at the two mornings. On the left, the world of possibilities stretched out, uncertain but alive. On the right, a tender finality awaited, a chance to speak truths left unspoken, to honor love and loss, and then step away. His hands trembled as he reached toward the door. The choice was not between life and death, but between forgetting and remembering, avoidance and honesty, silence and the courage to speak. Walter realized with a clarity both painful and liberating that no matter which morning he chose, he could not escape the responsibility of what he had been, nor the chance to embrace what he still could be. And as he stepped closer, he felt the pull of both paths, a soft tug at his chest and his heart, knowing that the final step would define the meaning of everything that had brought him to this cafe between lives. The door waited. 2 mornings stretched before him, and Walter took a slow, steadying breath, preparing to choose. Part 10, Receipt for a Life. Walter's hand hovered over the shimmering surface of the door, the 2 mornings before him. The soft glow of the cafe seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, the jukebox emitting a faint, hopeful hum. He closed his eyes and let memories wash over him. The boy in booth 7, the letters he had never sent, the unremembered souls, May's gentle smile, and Evelyn's unwavering patience. He thought of Michael, of the years lost to silence and pride. He thought of May, of love deferred, of apologies whispered too late. And he thought of himself, a man who had carried both regret and hope, fear and courage through decades of quiet living. Finally, he opened his eyes. With a deep, trembling breath, he reached for the morning on the right, the ethereal dawn of a final goodbye. He stepped through the door. The world around him shimmered, softened, and then solidified into the familiar light of a small kitchen. May sat at the table, letters stacked beside her, and for a heartbeat, she looked up. Walter felt the weight of decades pressing into this single moment. He knelt beside her, voice choked with emotion. "I was scared," he whispered. "I'm proud of you. I'm sorry for everything I left unsaid." Tears glistened in May's eyes, and she reached for his hands. "It's all right," she said softly. "It's finally all right." Outside the window, the sun rose slowly, bathing the room in golden light. Walter felt the warmth on his face, the gentle pull of life, and a profound sense of closure. He had faced fear, embraced honesty, and offered love. The cafe had guided him, but the courage had been his. When he opened his eyes again, he was back in the cafe. The door shimmered faintly. The two mornings now collapsed into one, the choice complete. He approached Evelyn, holding out May's old wedding ring. "For you," he said. "For the cafe. For helping me see." Evelyn accepted it silently, her eyes reflecting gratitude, mystery, and something deeper he could not name. "Thank you, Walter," she said. "You've left more than a memory here. You've left a story for those who will come after." He felt a lightness in his chest, a release of decades of weight. The cafe, patient and eternal, had fulfilled its purpose once again. Patrons moved quietly, the jukebox played softly, and the warm aroma of coffee filled the air. Walter knew he would move on, whether to another life, another existence, or a peaceful rest. But he had left a mark, one that would ripple beyond himself. As he walked toward the door to the unknown, the cafe whispered around him, a gentle promise to the next visitor. And somewhere in the soft light, Evelyn poured another cup, setting it before an empty seat, ready to guide the next soul who would arrive. Walter took one last breath, carrying the fullness of love, regret, courage, and peace. He stepped forward, and the cafe waited, eternal and patient, for the next story to unfold.